Alrighty, it's about time we get this thing wrapped up. This time around, we're going to be doing the interior, the last of the bodywork, and getting it all put together. The drag pack, depending on how one orders it, they can configure it with additional gauges. Depending on the gauges you order, you can either get a triple gauge pod below the dash, replacing the vents, and I've seen a few of them actually hanging from the roll cage. And since this thing does not need a radio, they have replaced that entire assembly there with some rocker switches. This thing also has a great big old tachometer, and again, it could be in 3 different spots. Usually it's mounted on either side of the main gauge cluster, and I've seen a few of them mounted directly on the steering column. I will be mounting mine right there. Being a race car, this thing also has to have a roll cage. So I went on to Colts, I just found a random roll cage, whatever was free like usual, then I set out to modify it. This was designed for a Honda Civic, if I remember right, and it said it was scaled to 124. It is not. That thing is way too tiny. So what I did is I just measured the width from door panel to door panel and then just scaled it up accordingly, and it fit just fine. Aside from that though, this is a 10-point roll cage that came in this car, so I just got to cutting pieces out that we do not need. I would have liked to have showed you all this process, but I am running low on resin, and I didn't want to print another cage just to show you guys me cutting parts of it off. Even though this cage does not fit perfectly, it is still convincing enough to kind of fill the need we're going for here. My idea though is I'm just going to not glue it in place. I'm going to have it mounted kind of high, so when I push it up into the body, it's going to push it down just deep enough to where it'll still fit the entire kind of passenger cabin of the car. Whatever that section of the car is called. Cockpit. So now that I know exactly where I need to drill all these holes, I could just transfer all of these measurements and marks over to the interior tub for this car. Now when you drill your hole, do not forget to kind of do it at an angle. It's got to be a little bit of a bevel here, otherwise the roll cage will not sit flush where it needs to go. See how the bend on the roll cage is right there where it goes in the hole? We got to kind of oblong that hole so it'll fit. Off camera, I also cut out the hole for the rocker panels where the radio used to be. I also cut off the pedal for the parking brake. For the mock-up here, I had used the wider Dodge Challenger seats that came with the kit, and I know that they will clear the roll cage. So I have absolute and utter faith that these narrower Dodge Viper seats will definitely fit. So let's get these guys dug out here, glued together, then we'll move on from there. Oh wait, hey, hold on. On Instagram, I had entered a giveaway on the Kirby Tool Company, and I won. Well, like me and 4 other dudes, but yeah, I was one of 5. If you guys are not familiar with them, what they do is they make hobby knife handles. And for what they are rather expensive. They're $30 to $70 for just a handle. And what you're getting is a solid chunk of machined metal. That is solid. This thing is heavy. Watch it bouncing everything around on my bench here when I drop it. Now the engineering on these is where it gets kind of tricky. It's how it holds the blade in place. Everything is held in place by some super strong magnets. And they really do hold them in place. You gotta purposely pull that blade out when you need to remove it. I've been using this for a while now. It holds extremely well. I don't know if I'd trust it for a razor saw, but I often use the back of my X-Acto blades as a scribing tool, and it holds up just fine. Now the giveaway that I had entered, it is for that little one in the background there. I don't know why he sent me the bigger one. I'm not complaining. It's awesome and I love it. But this is what the giveaway was for. It is essentially just the same thing, just in a much smaller package. And the idea here is that you just take the cap off, flip it over, and there is your blade. And again, everything is held together with magnets. To give you an idea just how strong the magnets holding the blade are, watch this. And not only did that overcome the two magnets holding the cap and the body together, but it also held the weight of the collet as well. Now, I don't have a lot of regular hobby blades since I bought that Alpha tool a while ago, but yeah, I have to get some ordered. I really like this thing. Now, disclaimer, I am not getting paid to say anything about his tools or anything of the sort. I just want a giveaway, and it's my honest opinion. I really like him. Go check him out on Instagram, guys. It's worth it. Alright, back to the build though. Well, typical Revell fashion. The seat bag doesn't fit that well. Now, normally what I do is I just fill that gap full of super glue and sand it all flush. But I saw another builder doing something and I want to give it a try to see if it actually works. The Tamiya Extra Thin, it is a solvent. It works by melting the plastic and infusing it together once it dries. So once that plastic is kind of liquidy and molten, I'm just going to squeeze it together, and then all the squeeze out is just going to fill that gap. To my surprise, with the little bit I've used, this is actually working pretty well. Now don't get me wrong, it still requires some sanding and some cleanup. It just seems a whole lot quicker and more efficient than using super glue. And you guys know I love that stuff. From there though, we are just going to paint everything in the interior semi-gloss black. In my haste to get everything painted, I completely forgot that I have to remove these mounting tabs right here for the back seat since we're not using a back seat. I'm going to cut them off as flush as I can with my super worn out nippers. I think it's about time to upgrade these things. Since I couldn't get it completely flush, I'm just going to go back and sand them down. Now they do not have to be perfect since we're going to do some flocking. I just don't want them sticking up through the flocking. Off camera, I just do another couple coats of paint on that to cover all my sins. And now we can move on to the flocking. You guys have seen me do this before. There's tons of tutorials on YouTube, so I'm not going to waste a lot of time. For those of you unfamiliar, you just go down with a very wet coat of paint or white glue, just something sticky. While it's still wet, you just sprinkle your flocking into it and then dust off as much as you can. And then when it dries, it holds your flocking in place and it looks like you have carpet. Now, oddly enough, being a super stripped down race car, this thing still had some creature comforts. It may not have side view mirrors, but you know what it did have? It had power windows and it had carpet. Except this one. This one also had power steering, don't forget. This is our one of one super rare car. So I think you guys get the gist of what I'm doing here. So let's move on, because by this time, all the other interior pieces we had painted are now dry, which means I could put some masking tape on them without any fear. So I'm just going to get that all painted up in a nice silver color to match the real car. The decals for the gauges, they were like, the film on them was wider than the hole, so getting those down in there was kind of a pain in the ass. The tachometer I had found on Colts has a shift light, so we're going to use that. I first painted the light silver, then once it dried, I went over it with some clear orange. I also found a tachometer decal in the stash. It's a little bit small, but from a distance it looks convincing. Now with all of our little greeblies painted up, we could put this dashboard together. And it's hard to tell, but some little switches in there, I painted all of those silver. Probably shouldn't have wasted my time, because once it's all assembled, you can't even see them. But you and I know it's there. I couldn't find any decals for these, so I just painted them white. They're going to be kind of hidden by the shifter, so just looking through the window of the car, you could see that there are gauges there, but that's about as far as they go. And with the tack glued in place, that is our completed dashboard. Now by the time I got this done, all the flocking had dried and set up, so we can move on to finishing that part of the interior. And the seats were sitting a little too far back for my liking, so I just put a little piece of styrene in there to act as like a tripod to tilt them forward a little bit more. Now since I didn't have a way to mount those, since I wasn't using the factory seats, I kind of just blindly stabbed them into place, and I got them lined up fairly well. Now in the real car, these shifters, they're mounted at kind of an angle towards the driver, and it looks like some idiot went in there and wasn't paying attention. So I made mine as centered as I possibly could, just because it looks better. From here though, it is just basic assembly as per the standard Revell instructions. According to my research, the roll cage either came black or Mopar blue. I'm gonna paint mine blue just to break up all that black in the interior. And with that guy stabbed in place loosely, that is the interior completely finished on this car. Since we've had to scratch build and modify so much on this, well, why not modify and build a drive shaft? Off camera, I put the engine in place and I ran a measurement from the tail shaft of the tranny to the yoke on the rear diff. It is 65 millimeters. Nice even number. I like that. So now that I know my dimensions, I went to Colts to see if I could find a drive shaft. I kind of found something. Now I forget what this was exactly, but it was something for an RC car. But more importantly, it's got some U-joints on it, and that's what we're going to use. Now by just complete sheer and utter luck, that smaller tapered section is the exact same dimension as some tubing I already have on hand. So for this next step here, I'm going to cut it just smack dab down the center because I want to have a little bit of a tang to hold on to. Then I'm just going to mount them up in a drill, and I'm just going to sand down that flange on the ends of them. The one that goes towards the pinion on the rear diff, it still needs to have a little bit of a flange, but the one that goes into the back of the transmission, it does not need to have any flange at all. And since I got these chucked up, I might as well go ahead and center drill them for the pins we're going to be using later to hold them in place. And I didn't quite drill deep enough, so, let's drill another hole. A little piece of plastic there, it is awfully flimsy, but we're not doing this for strength. This is just to keep everything aligned and centered when we put it all together. And that goes for both sides of the U-joints. Alright, so now that I got all of my alignment pieces set out and where I need them to go, we're just going to trim everything short and we could glue one side together. And yeah, I know that is misaligned. Don't worry, off camera I got it straightened up. Oh, and do your best to ignore the misprint on one side of that U-joint there. I'm going to have to remember to install that up towards the body so we don't see it. And with that seam cleaned up a little bit, you can't even tell that these were two different parts at one time. And I had already marked it, but I forgot to turn on the camera. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up that other U-joint right on the edge so I know exactly where I need to cut this to make this all fit and be the proper length. Now I'll just glue that in place, and then that's our drive shaft done. It's ready for paint. And with the paint on that dry, we could finally get this engine mounted in place permanently. And that thing fits like a glove right down into the factory engine mounts for the V8. That is convenience. On the real car, the intake ducting goes down and it catches fresh air from that lower grill on the front bumper. I don't have room to do that, so I just kind of angled that downwards, and then I'm just going to try my best to hide the fact that I don't have one with the radiator here. Now that is the chassis completely done, so now we can move on to the rest of the bodywork. And it's like 3 a.m. right now. I'm running low on tape, so I'm kind of getting janky with things. I usually mask off the body completely for overspray, but I am just going to use post-it notes. And looking at my mascot in the background there, I know this will work because I laid out a super heavy bit of paint and none of it bled through. So I am confident this will work. So from here, it's just a lot of masking, a lot of little bit of detail painting, more masking, more painting, so on and so forth. And yeah, I kind of missed the line there. Ugh. Don't worry, some panel line accent filled that gap up just fine. Ooh, shiny. And now it is time for all that masking and painting that I had just talked about. So enjoy. Now in the corner here, I had just a tiny tad bit of bleed through. But since the body is so highly polished, that easily cleans right up with some 12,000 grit sandpaper. Now when I flip this over here, do not look at the P on the word Mopar. I dropped this thing because I'm stupid and clumsy, and I hurt it. And I didn't have time to go back and fix it, so we're just gonna roll with it. I went around the edge of that with a black Sharpie. That is to simulate like a weather stripping or a seal. Now, showing off some teasers in the group to let them know I am almost done. Then I realized that I had forgot to paint all of the black trim around the windows. Now that piece of tape peeled off, that is all of the painting, all of the polishing, everything done. So painting the black trim around the windows is not new. Anyone who's been here a while has seen me do that several times. There's tons of tutorials out there. If you're new here though, and you're not familiar with the process, Justin over at Modelworks, he had just done a tutorial on that a few weeks ago. So if you want to see how this is done, go check out his channel. Now the clear parts, they are super brittle. So I always recommend sawing off any of the screw points. In the past, I've cut them off before with some nippers, and the violent action of breaking them off has actually caused the clear parts to crack. Now we did paint all this before that, so we got a little bit of a touch up to do here. That is not a big deal. Just sand it flush and then hit that section with a chunk of Sharpie. A chunk of Sharpie. I'm leaving that in. These guys just install from the outside, as all windows should, and they fit in place perfectly. And they are held in place with just a few little precision dabs of microset crystal clear. We're almost done, guys, I promise. We're getting there. Since I had 3D printed my wheels and tires, I'm just going to go back now with the tires and hit them with some Tamiya rubber black. If you guys do not want to spend extra money on some super situational paint, you could get away with painting these flat black. I cannot tell a difference. And the wheels on a real car, they are polished aluminiums. What I did is I just went through my silver stockpile. I settled on some Apollo silver from Splash Paints. If I remember right, that is the base coat that I did in the Audi R8. It's just a really bright silver. Yeah, these things fit so tight, there was absolutely no reason to use any glue. Now for the back wheels, I had to get creative yet again. The only files I could find came with a bead lock on them, and this car did not have bead lock wheels. So basically what I done is I just printed up an extra set of wheels, And then I just mocked them up in my drill and used it like a lathe, and I just sanded down that ring. So let me pop this bead lock out and get this smooth ring in, and then we'll move on to our next problem. And that is figuring out the back spacing for the front wheels. As they sit fresh off the printer, these wheels stick out way too far on the front of the car. The solution is easy. On the hub or the hat or the rotor, whatever you want to call that part, I just cut a millimeter off the back of it. So I just chuck that up here in my ruler the best I can. I'm going to leave a little scratch right at the 1 millimeter mark. Then I am just going to cut that off with my razor saw. Now, as a saw usually does, it left a pretty rough surface, so just go in there and smooth all that up. Doesn't have to be perfect. I don't even know why I did that, to be honest. I'm going to recycle some of these supports. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stab that in a hole in the center of this rotor, and that is going to be our alignment pin for later. Now, once those both are cut down, I painted them in a metallic gray. This looks convincingly like steel, like a cast iron rotor. Off camera, I also painted the caliper silver, and that just slides over the rotor wherever you want it to go. And with all the painting done, we could finally make these two pieces become one. I'm leaving that pin nice and long because it's there for alignment and not strength. And I'm going to put that in the top hole here just so I could get this thing as low as possible. Then just rotate the wheel so the caliper is oriented where it needs to go. Then just repeat that process for the back wheels as well. Done. Now, I didn't record me stabbing the chassis into the body. You guys saw me do that enough times during video 2, if I remember right. So I think you guys understand how that works. So at the time of this voiceover, everything has been turned in to the judges. All the voting is done. I did not take first. However, I did not take last either. And that's good enough for me. But yeah, this one is done. Thank you guys so much for going on this journey with me. Have a good night.